All right, this is episode number 6 of My Mormon Memory. Why am I doing this? I mean, I've never really told anyone this besides my wife, these memories or these experiences being a Latter-day Saint. It's traumatizing for me. I mean, what I'm talking about right now is really traumatizing for someone like me. And I haven't gotten to the worst part yet. The thing is, I'm treating this whole thing like a therapist. I am seeing a therapist right now, and it's the microphone. And I am seeing a therapist in real life, just letting you know that. But this is kind of just like a therapist thing where I'm talking to the microphone here, and I'm talking about my experience and my memories of being raised and a part of a high-demand religion for 30-something years. And I don't know if I'm going to put this up on the podcast networks. I'm not really familiar with podcasting. I've never really done it. I was a YouTuber for a while, and but I might make this available via podcasting, I believe, as I'm recording this. So if you're listening to this, then I guess I made that decision. I just want to put this out there. This story, I find this story very unique, and it's my own personal therapy. And maybe if I put this up, it will actually help someone out as well who feels the exact same thing that I have and gone through the same experience that I have. And what I just said in the last episode about one of the worst moments of my career in my life, where I felt completely betrayed by my coworkers. And, a lot of people would be like, that's no, it's not normal. I've worked at a lot of jobs. I've worked at a handful of office jobs. And every time an employee makes a minor mistake on the project, what do? The boss or the person who gave you the task talks to you verbally in person that you made the mistake and have you fix it. No, that's not what happened in the last episode, folks. Didn't hear anything. It was silent. Thank you. Thanks for doing the project. And then a few days later, got called in and talked to my boss, and my boss threatened to fire my ass in 30 days. That's what happened in the last episode. If you haven't heard the last episode yet, and this is your first episode, remember, what the hell are you doing? Go back and listen to the first episode. This is a podcast, I guess. This is a journey where if you're interested, read up and listen up through every episode. I'm having a hard time talking right now. Like I said, this is kind of hard to say. This is kind of emotional for me. Listen to every episode to this point. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so the last episode was very hard for me to talk about. I felt really betrayed by my coworkers, and I felt like I could trust anyone in the church office building and the church business sense. I felt like it was very cutthroat. I felt like it was very passive aggressive, very backstabby, very snitchy, kind of a snitch kind of culture. It was a very toxic culture behind a smile. And that's what it felt like. And I served a mission, and I'll talk about my mission later in this podcast as well. I'm just going through phase 1, my faith crisis right now. And then after this phase, we'll do phase 2, which would be my upbringing. Anyway, enough of that. I'm going to talk about what happened after that incident where I was walking down Main Street in Salt Lake City for a couple of hours, wanting to jump in front of a bus because I felt absolutely emotionally drained and completely traumatized by what happened at my job and what was going on. But that wasn't all of it. I didn't mention all of it in the last episode. There was another thing that was happening in my personal life that I was freaking out about. I was doubting the Mormon Church. I was having doubts. And I mentioned in episode 2, I mentioned when it all kind of started for me back in 2012, about a year earlier than this. I started unraveling church history that I've never heard of before. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? And I was working for the church, and I was reading a lot of church history and stuff. I was fascinated by it, and I was uncovering a bunch of stuff that I've never heard of before about church history, stuff that would be considered anti-Mormon on my mission. Stay away from anti-Mormon literature, they said. For me, the longest time I thought anti-Mormon literature was just, that Mormons have horns, and we're all polygamous, and we're all like, we don't have any technology, we just we just have a horse and buggy, that kind of stuff. Stuff like that. All the crazy deep doctrine kind of stuff. Some of it true, some of it not true. That was always, I thought, was anti-Mormon. And then I started uncovering stuff that was actually legitimately history. It was actually what really happened, and I was uncovering it as I was working for the Mormon Church, and I was freaking out inside. As I took my walk in the last episode, I was also stressed about doubting the church, not because I found out it was a toxic environment working for them, but the fact that I was doubting the church because the church history I was uncovering with some of the tasks I was doing. And this was about the same time the essays came out. The church released a bunch of essays deep in their website that no one can find, but it was mostly just plausible deniability for them. They talked about all the stuff that I discovered a few years earlier, like the rock in the hat, and they released this information and polygamy and all that stuff, probably for liability, I don't know. And I was finding this stuff as well, and I was just like, what is going on? I felt like it was almost like a Mandela effect. If you guys are familiar with Mandela effects, I recommend looking it up after this episode. It's where people claim, and I've had some weird things with Mandela effects where I'm just like, what the hell? That's weird. A Mandela effect is where history kind of warps and changes over time, supposedly. Like if you guys right now pause the episode and you look up Fruit of the Loom, if you're familiar with Fruit of the Loom's logo, I had Fruit of the Loom underwear growing up. Yeah, too much information. If you imagine the Fruit of the Loom logo, what do you see? You see a cornucopia, don't you? That weird little, kind of looks like a horn and a bunch of fruit in it. That is the logo of Fruit of the Loom, right? Nope, look it up right now. That's not what it is. It does not have a cornucopia, just let you know that. That's a Mandela effect. What? I bet you're just like, what the hell? That's weird, isn't it? That's what it felt like what was going on. I was experiencing a Mormon Mandela effect where I'm just like, okay, now history changed. Now Joseph Smith was supposedly a freaking polygamist, and he was sleeping with other men's wives and being a dirtbag like my biological father was, and just a terrible person, and just there was no golden plates involved, all that stuff. It was like a Mandela effect. It was like history changed overnight. And I am literally questioning my reality. I did not know what was real, what was up, what was upside down, what was not upside down. I couldn't tell the difference. That's what was going on at the same time as I was taking my walk down Main Street. All kinds of emotions, and I could not tell anybody. You cannot tell your doubts to anyone. Because what would happen is you're doubting, you're a bad person, you don't believe enough, and my wife's probably going to leave me and stuff like that. I could not even tell my wife that I was doubting the church. And it was absolutely terrifying because people that doubt the church are bad people. That's what they say. If you doubt the church, you're doing something wrong. You're a terrible person and you're going to be led astray by Satan. And it was absolutely terrifying. I was scared to death. And that just made this whole thing a lot harder, even though at the same time I was really struggling at my job at the church. So at the same time I was looking for other jobs, and I was looking for job, and as I mentioned in a previous episode, I suck ass at job interviews. As someone who's an introvert, who's socially awkward, who has a hard time with eye contact, I got the skills, I just couldn't get hired anywhere because I struggle with social interactions, and job interviews are like torture for me. It's like pulling my own teeth. I hate job interviews with a passion because I don't like to socialize with people. I'm an introvert. And I was looking for jobs outside of the church office building, and I was struggling. I couldn't get hired anywhere. And I was just, I was a graduate of a bachelor's degree, and I couldn't get hired anywhere. And then I also had a few job interviews. I started looking for jobs in the church office department as well, and I couldn't get hired. And at the same time, it hurt me because in the last episode, I mentioned how now the full-time employees of the church office building, they don't trust me anymore in my department because I'm the guy who screwed up. He messed up on one project, and now they've given up on me. They treat me like I'm an apostate. And at the same time, I was thinking, maybe they're treating me like this because I'm doubting and they somehow know. So I was going through my mind as well. They somehow knew I was a bad apple or a black sheep. I'm doubting the church and they don't want to work with me anymore. And that was going through my mind as well. And I was scared, man. I was really, really scared. This was a really hard time in my life, you guys. There is music, there is songs I cannot listen to anymore because I would listen to songs during this time period on Spotify or whatever it was back then, Groove Shark. I don't remember. Remember Groove Shark, you guys? Yeah. Where did that go? I used to listen to music all the time on headphones when I was in the church, working for the church, and I can't listen to these songs anymore. If I hear them on the radio, I change the station. I mean, if I hear another Imagine Dragons song, it'll be too soon. I just can't. There's songs I can't listen to anymore because it reminds me of this time of my life when I was starting to doubt the church and I was going through hell. And I could not tell anybody. I was scared to tell anybody. I was suffering in silence, you guys. Anyway, things got fun. And I was starting to look for a job. I was desperate. I was starting to look for jobs in the church department as well. And every so often, not very much, the church will never hire new people. They would never create new openings or new positions. They always had the same openings. They always had the only jobs that were full-time jobs in the church publishing department that I was in was when a full-time employee decided to be replaced or quit or move somewhere else in another department in the church office building. And then what they did was, it was the most cutthroat thing ever. They would allow all the interns, there was at least 50 interns in the whole publishing department. They were all rat race to get the one position from the full-time employee that's leaving that position. And I was one of them, and it was just the most cutthroat thing ever. Like I said, I've worked at a lot of office jobs, a lot of toxic places. I worked in a newspaper company once, and it was pretty toxic there. But this was just absolutely like bedlam. It was crazy. And most of the time they would just hire another full-time employee from another team anyway, or outsourcing a full-time employee. And the interns are pretty much just like the bottom of the barrel. Even though the interns outnumbered the full-time employees, we were all kind of treated like pawns. There's always an unwritten order of things in the church. A lot of people who worked for the church, like me, they claim that there's a lot of unwritten order of things in the church office building. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of privilege with full-time employees or general authorities, or a lot of stuff like that where they're treated better. I mean, there was meetings where interns weren't allowed in. There was a Christmas party where interns weren't allowed, full-time employees only. There was a lot of full-time employees that had last names of general authorities. For example, the lady that snitched on me that I mentioned in the last episode, she was related to a former BYU president, and that was her last name. And like I said, I'm not gonna dox people on this podcast. All right, I'm not gonna name names. Maybe I'll say first names once in a while. I might blur it out, actually. I'm not gonna be a dick. All right, I'm not gonna name names. I'm not gonna dox people here. All right. I'm just not going to do that. I might give them different names. I don't know. But yeah, there was a lot of nepotism. There was another lady on my team who I didn't really like either. She was really toxic, and her last name was a former president of the church. She had the same last name, and there was a lot of that going on. There was a lot of nepotism as well. There was a lot of that. And it was just a rat race. Like the job interviews, to get hired full-time, if you're already an intern, you're pretty much treated like a second-class citizen. And they would give you like the least good. They wouldn't give you any good software. I remember they gave me an old laptop that didn't even have Photoshop or any really good software in it. And the company, it's a corporation that makes tons of money, And I had to go online to do Photoshop stuff, because sometimes we had to do like Photoshop images and stuff, and they wouldn't even have Photoshop on these laptops. And for the interns, the full-time employees, which were a minority, were the minority on the department. They had like brand new laptops by Apple, really fancy stuff. And like 80% of the employees were interns, which had really run down old laptops they probably found at a surplus store or something. Anyway, so that's what was going on. I actually had a few job interviews trying to get hired full-time at the church office building. I don't know what I was thinking after what happened in the previous episode. I'm just like, why do I even want to work full-time here with these people? I don't trust them. They don't trust me, and I'm down in the church. I don't even think any of this is true. But yeah, I'm so desperate to have a full-time job to support my wife and kids and my family. My wife just had a second kid, and she wasn't working full-time, and it was tough. And so I had a job interview, and it's so cringe. I remember in one of these job interviews, I was trying to overcompensate with my doubts of the church, where I'm just like, the church, I love church history. I like practically bared my testimony in one of these job interviews, and they would start these job interviews with a prayer and stuff, and every meeting was started with a prayer, and it was really it's different. It was a different work environment, you guys. It was really weird. Anyway, so I didn't get any job. There was one job that I really wanted. It was in church history, actually. It was one of the church history content creators, full-time employee kind of stuff. And I wanted to get into that. But of course, I didn't get hired because I was the guy who messed up on the tasks, And I didn't even get a second interview, I remember. And it was just really it really sucked. And everyone knew I didn't get a second interview. So it was really awkward going into the cubicle. And everyone there, all the interns were just like, I got the second interview for the position. How about you? And I'm just like, I didn't get it. I didn't even get a second interview. And I felt so stupid. And it just really hurt my self-esteem because, like I said, I'm socially awkward and I struggle with social anxiety. And there was another incident that happened that really kind of got on my nerves. There was this kid, no, not a kid. He was a grown-up. He was my age. And he worked at a pizza delivery. He was from Springville, some town in Utah Valley. He worked in the pizza delivery for like 10 years, a long time. He had no web design experience whatsoever. He was an intern, and we pretty much worked together. I took him under my wing, and I taught him a bunch of web design skills. And he was actually a really cool kid. No hard feelings. He was a really good guy. Really humble, really good guy. He was no hard feelings. Good guy. And I pretty much taught him everything. I taught him about HTML and stuff. He hardly even knew about stuff. He was attending college at the time, so that's how he got into the internship. But, he hardly knew anything about web design. And I knew a lot about web design, and I graduated. I had a bachelor's degree. And he only had like 6 months of college at the time. And both of us went into a job interview for a position. Yeah, I think it was the family history one. I think it was a family history content for the full-time employee who left. They were interviewing a bunch of interns for that, and I wanted that one. And this other kid who I taught all the things I knew, he ended up getting the job. He ended up getting the position. And I was happy for him, but that really hurt because they hired him who had absolutely no skills whatsoever, and I pretty much taught him everything. I don't want to sound bitter and kind of like. I was really offended by that. I'm just like, wait a minute. I'm the one that taught you everything I knew, and they hired him and they hired you instead. I don't know. That sounds really bitter. I mean, I was happy for him, because he was just like me, He was a really friendly guy. He wasn't socially awkward like me. He was really outgoing. So, maybe that's how it worked out. But I felt really betrayed by that too, really hurt by that. Like I felt like I was never going to get hired full time in the church office building again, or get hired anywhere. It was really hard for my mental health. And to make things worse, there was another coworker of mine who was a full-time employee, and she was always the nicest person ever. This wasn't one of the employees that snitched on me and that you heard on the last episode. She was actually really, really nice. She was one of the 3 people that interviewed me in my job interview, and she was a full-time employee. I don't remember what she did. She was one of the content people that I don't even remember what position that she was or what she did on the website, but I helped her out a few times, and she would always tell me that she had my back, and I'll help you get hired here or anywhere else. Just let me know. I'll do anything for you. You're an awesome person. And she would always tell me how she would always be so nice and stuff. And then one day I helped her out with a couple of assignments, and I felt like I did a pretty good job. And then one day I was trying to update my LinkedIn profile and stuff and trying to get hired at a job somewhere. And I asked her for a letter of recommendation, and she flat out told me no. She was just like, no. And I'm just like, what? And I sent her the email because she wasn't on my team anymore. She went to a different team at that point. And I asked her, I sent her an email saying, hey, would you like spend 5 minutes and write me a letter of recommendation? I'm still kind of bitter about this. I'm pretty salty about this because this is another kind of, they kind of ripped my heart out of my chest kind of thing where it really hurt. I felt so betrayed by this person. And she was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm just like, why? And she's like, oh, we've hardly even worked together. And she was kind of right about that. We only did maybe 2, maybe 3 assignments together, but still, I worked with her on the same team for about 6-7 months, and I helped her out with a few assignments. I don't know. I have a theory that maybe it's because they ended up not liking me because I made a mistake that one time on that project, and they don't trust me and they gave up on me. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but I was so bothered by that. That hurts. That really, I'm still really upset about that. And that was like the last time I even saw her or talked to her again. I never saw her again, and I was really angry about that. I remember it was at that point where I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to work here then. I'm going to look for a job somewhere else. I'm going to get the hell out of this hellhole because this place sucked. All right. It's terrible. It's a career graveyard. A lot of the older people that have been at the church for a long time, the church office building, they walk around like zombies. They don't really have like almost like they lost their soul. They don't have a sense of purpose. They're kind of stuck. So in a way, I'm happy I got out. I did not want to be like that. And I'm sure as hell a lot of them was still there. And so at that point that I figured that out, I knew I was done. And I'm done. I'm done with these clowns. And I was really upset. And this was a time in my life where I was really struggling. I was really, really, really angry. I was kind of going through an anger phase in my life where I was just pissed off. And I've gone through anger phases. I'm still kind of feel like I'm kind of still a part of one. Because, I'm reconstructing everything and reconstructing my life, and it's hard. And I have to put the pieces back together because the rug was pulled off under my feet. And so I was really, really hurt by that. And and the funny thing is I talked to a few people from another team that I hardly even worked with from the video team. And I had one person from the video team that I talked to. He was just like, yeah, man, I'll do it. And he was an awesome guy. And he wrote me a letter of recommendation and it took like 5 minutes. No hassle, no sweat. And I think I only did one project with him. And he was just like, yeah, sure. But this coworker of mine who said all these, wonderful things about me and I have you back and I'll do anything for you. And then, no, I'm not going to it just made me so mad. I'm sorry. I don't want to sound like a bitter, angry curmudgeon here, but that just made me so upset. It really hurt and good riddance, And at that point in my life, that's when I knew I'm just like, okay, I'm going to remove myself from this toxic environment. I mean, this working for the church office building was a disaster. It was one of the worst. I consider it the worst decision of my life. And it kind of started a chain reaction, which I'm going to mention in the next episodes, where it kind of started a chain reaction, kind of a butterfly effect, where it just started one thing after another of just bad things. And it was really, really hard. And there was a few funny things that happened too. I remember there was a passive aggressive meeting. I kid you not. There was a passive aggressive meeting that was mandatory. My manager was just like, okay, we're going to get together. We're going to have a meeting and it's going to be about passive aggressive. And I remember I'm just like, are you kidding me? And it was kind of just funny. Everyone's just like talking about other employees. Like, yeah, they do that. They're guilty, but they don't name names. There was one lady in there who was one of the people that had the same last name as a former general authority prophet. She was definitely guilty of passive aggression. She was terrible at it. She was so passive aggressive. And she was just like in the meeting, kind of just keeping her mouth shut. And everyone's just like, oh yeah, people do that here. It was just kind of funny. Yeah, it was so cringe. And then there was another time where we were struggling financially, all right? My wife and I were struggling financially. We were barely able to, barely hanging on there. And I show up to work one day and I did not get paid for that 2-week period. And as an intern, you fill in a slip of how many hours that you work, and then you hand it into the financial person on the team, and they move it into the financial team and financial people, folks on the church office building, and then they pay you. That's how it worked. And I did not get paid for a 2-week period, and I was freaking out. And I'm just like, I told my boss, and I'm just like, hey, I didn't get paid last week. And he's just like, oh yeah, talk to so-and-so. Like I said, I'm not going to name names. This lady, and she was in charge of the team's financial stuff or like payments and stuff. And she wasn't very nice. She wasn't a very nice person. She was kind of wasn't really a fan. And she was just like, well, you forgot, you didn't date it right. You didn't write the date correctly. What she meant was when I signed the paper and then I dated it, it had to be that specific day itself. And what pissed me off is that she didn't tell me the day of. She told me 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, and I had to go to her and tell her, hey, I didn't get paid 2 weeks ago. And she's like, oh yeah, 2 weeks ago, you didn't fill your form right. Again, people don't communicate. I mean, I struggle with communication myself, but these people did not know how to communicate with me. They would just be like, oh, it's okay. You're doing a good job. Mm-hmm. And then 3 weeks later, can you come in my office, please? Yeah, that's how it was. It was ridiculous. And she was all like, she was kind of a snarky little, and she wasn't I'm not a fan. She wasn't, like I said, there's a lot of cool people. There was a lot of great people in the church that I worked with, that I was friends with, but there was a few really bad apples. And I got along with a lot of people in the church office building, even though a lot of them eventually moved and I was stuck with kind of the weirdos. But there was a few people there, man. I'm just like, there's some of the worst people I've ever worked with. The best and the worst, and I was so upset. I was so oh my gosh. So I had to refill the whole thing, and I had to refill the whole thing, give it back to her. And then she had to, and then I was 2 weeks late. So then my boss was just like, oh yeah, they put on a big stinker for you. But yeah, I was able to get you paid for this week. And I'm happy for my boss that he did that. He was a good guy, good guy. My boss. But that just made me so, I'm just like, it's just cutthroat. This place is so cutthroat and toxic. And, they just don't care about their employees. They don't really, up top, they don't really care about their employees as much. I mean, my boss cared about, my manager was a good guy. My manager and my team lead, they were good people. But I felt like higher up in the higher echelons of the church, it was like cutthroat. It was pretty bad, and I had to get the hell out of there. By this point, I was really depressed. I was tired of going on the train every single day, getting my ass on the train and having to sit on the train for 1 hour every morning and walk to the church office building or the North office building, which I was at most of the time, and then have to walk back. And I was getting to the point where I was really, really depressed and really short-tempered and angry. I was a really angry guy. I was going through a hard time. And there was one day I remember it was just a day when I would show up to work. I would spend an hour getting there on the train, and then I would get to work and not have anything to do. And my boss would just give me grunt work that no one else wanted to do. Hey, just find broken links and fix them, because no one wants to work with you because you messed up that one time. And I literally would spend all day just like, I have nothing to do. And I would spend like 4 or 5 hours just sitting at my desk trying to find stuff to do. And it sucked. And I would reach out to these full-time employees, and I would not hear back from them. And it was awful. And there was one day that I just decided I'm just going to leave early. So I left early, and I got on the UTA, the city bus. Like I would get on the bus on North Temple, and it would take me all the way to the train station because it was like a mile away. And for some reason, this bus driver was being a total dick. I don't know. He must have been new or just having a power trip. But this is the only time I ever saw the guy. I don't know. He was like this big old guy, and he was just like, hey, I got to see your pass. I got to see your bus pass. And I'm just like, it's a free zone. This is downtown. You don't need to show the bus driver your pass because this is downtown. And I kind of explained it to him, and I was being nice. I wasn't being a jerk like this guy was. But he was just having a power trip. He's just like, well, you got to show me your pass when you get on the bus, regardless of if it's a free zone or not. I'm like, I've been riding the bus for a year now, and I've never done this. And he was just like, well, congratulations then. And he was just being a total jerk, and I was really pissed off. And then there was one other guy on the bus. I remember he kind of looked at me and kind of talked to me, and I couldn't understand what he was saying, but he was just like, from the tone of his voice, he's just like, yeah, he's an idiot. That's pretty much what the other, there was a guy behind me on the bus, and he's just like, yeah, don't let it get to you. This guy's a dumbass. Like, that's pretty much what he said. I didn't really hear him too well, but I was sitting there on the bus, and I'm just like, I don't want to be on this bus anymore. So I rang the bell, and I got out, and I kind of went off on the bus driver. I feel really bad because I respect people of service. If you're a bus driver, if you're a police officer, fireman, if you're a person of service and you're doing something to help the community out in any way, like transportation, I have full respect to you. But this bus driver, he really rubbed me the wrong way. Like I completely went off on this bus driver, and I feel really kind of bad about it. And he was kind of a jerk. He was kind of yelling back at me. He's just like, you do not yell at me like that. And he was like, you watch your language, son. And he was just, I kind of swore at him a little. I'm just like, you're just a power tripping douchebag. And I said some kind of harsh things to him, and I feel really bad about that. But, I lost my temper. Everyone does, and he would not open the door. I'm just like, open the door. He's like, no, I'm not opening the door until you apologize. And I didn't apologize to him. I'm just like, no, you apologize to me. And it was just, we kind of went back and forth. And then he eventually just opened the door, and he's like, you got a filthy mouth, son. And I'm just like, I just give him the finger and I walk off. I felt really, it's one of the few times I can count on my fingers as an introvert who's reserved, who's always trying to be peaceful. It's something I learned as being a Mormon my whole life, trying to hold in all the hate, all the anger, and all the human instincts that we all have. It's hard. It's, just like the Book of Mormon musical, you got to turn it off like a light switch. For me, I had to hold in my anger for 32 years, all right? Every time I would get mad, you can't get mad. Don't show contentions of the devil. You cannot get emotional. You can't get angry. That's evil. So I went off on this guy. It was almost like a volcanic eruption. And I felt kind of bad about it, but I kind of felt good about it too, because it was one of the few times in my life where I stubbed my foot down. I'm like, asshole, don't talk to me like that. I stood up for myself because that guy was unprofessional. I never saw him again. He probably got fired. I don't know. He didn't seem like a very good guy, but I completely went off on this guy, and I felt kind of bad about it, but I didn't. And I've never done it since. I've never went off. I don't usually, I don't want to be a jerk to people with profession or a service job. I treat everyone with respect. I don't try to be a Karen all the time. And so I remember walking back to the train station and I was just like, what the hell just happened? I got to get out of here. I am going down a dark path here. I am losing my temper and I got to get the hell out of here. I got to find a real job somewhere else. So that would be the next episode. I eventually found a job somewhere else and got the hell out of Dodge. All right. So that's the next episode. Thanks for listening. This one went a little bit longer, but that's okay. There was a lot to talk about. Thanks for listening. If you're interested, subscribe to this podcast and rate and review it. And if anyone else is hurt in the same way, like I've experienced, they need to hear this too. I think that's good. All right. Thanks for listening and thank you. Bye.